Hey everyone, thank you for your support. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing you more of the content you love. And be sure to comment down below where you are tuning in from. It started one night when I was scrolling through my partner's phone. Not because I was suspicious, not at first. I wasn't some jealous psycho trying to dig through their messages. I don't even know why I picked it up, honestly. Maybe I was bored, or maybe I was just trying to find something that would explain why they had been acting off lately. It wasn't even a big deal at first. I'd opened their texts, and there were a few that seemed odd, not anything glaring, just a couple of messages that felt like they were written with some kind of hidden meaning. But one of the texts stood out. It was from a contact I didn't recognize, and it was a few weeks old. It had a simple line in it. Can't wait to see you again tonight. Same place, same time. It wasn't that big of a deal, right? I mean, people text each other all the time about meeting up, but I hadn't heard about this same place, same time thing before. And when I went back to look at the rest of the conversation, it was just different. Something felt off. The messages weren't flirty, but they were definitely intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. I figured I was probably overthinking it, but I couldn't let it go. There was this nagging feeling that started growing in my chest, this gut instinct that told me I should keep looking. So I did. I dug deeper into the messages. I found more text, more conversations from that same person. And with each new message, the pit in my stomach kept getting bigger. There were little things at first, casual comments, vague references, but they started getting more clear, more direct. And there it was. A message that hit me like a punch to the gut. I can't wait to feel you again. It's been too long. Last night was perfect. That's when everything shifted. I don't know why, but I felt sick. I wanted to throw up. I had to stop reading. I don't know how long I stared at the screen after that, but I couldn't move. It was like the phone was burning my hands, like I was caught in some kind of trance. The whole world felt like it was collapsing on top of me. I needed answers. I had to confront them, but part of me was terrified to hear what would come out of their mouth. So I waited. I waited for them to come home. I could hear their footsteps as they approached the door, and my heart started to race. It was like every beat was pounding in my ears, louder and louder, drowning out everything else. When they walked in, they didn't notice at first. They smiled, like they always did, but I couldn't smile back. I was frozen, trying to figure out how to say it. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I just asked them flat out. It was harsh. It was blunt. I said, "Who the hell is this?" and shoved the phone in their face. But instead of the shock I expected, of them denying it or panicking or apologizing, their face changed. It was like a weight lifted off their shoulders. They weren't surprised. They weren't angry. They looked relieved. There was this calmness in their eyes, almost like they had been waiting for me to find out. I didn't know what to say. I stood there, staring, completely dumbfounded. I couldn't even comprehend what I was seeing. They didn't even look guilty. It looked like they'd just been let out of some kind of trap. And that's when they said it, not in an angry or defensive way, but quietly, almost gently. "Oh, thank God you finally figured it out." I was still too stunned to speak. I wanted to yell, I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I felt like I was in a dream or something. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had imagined them begging me to forgive them, or crying, or apologizing like a normal person would. But they didn't do any of that. Instead, they just stood there, looking at me like they were waiting for something. Then they said something I can't even remember clearly. Not the exact words, but it was something like, "Now I can let you go." Let me go. What did that even mean? My brain couldn't keep up. I couldn't make sense of anything. The room felt different all of a sudden. The air seemed thick, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me. The walls started to shift. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then it felt real, like the entire space around me was bending and warping. The furniture started to melt away, and the walls seemed to stretch out and twist into shadows. The light flickered, then disappeared. And before I knew it, I was no longer standing in the apartment I had been living in for years. I was back in the past. I didn't understand what was happening. I tried to call out, but my voice didn't sound right. It felt hollow. I turned around, but everything was wrong. The room was familiar, but it wasn't the same. The walls were cracked, the furniture old and rotting, the place covered in dust. It was the exact same apartment, but everything was decayed, like it had been abandoned for years. Then I heard the footsteps again, the same ones, the same rhythm, the same sound. And there they were, my partner, standing in front of me, smiling like they hadn't seen me in ages. I froze. I had no idea what was going on. My heart was pounding again, but this time there was no phone in my hand. There was no confrontation. It was like nothing had changed, like we were back to the beginning, back to where it all started. I tried to speak, but my voice was lost. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. I just had to watch as they approached me like everything was normal. The way they smiled, the way they looked at me, it was all wrong. I didn't recognize this version of them. It was like looking at a ghost or maybe a stranger wearing their face. And then it hit me. I had been here before. I had done this before. I was reliving it. I had been stuck in this loop, caught in this nightmare over and over again. I don't know how long I had been in this place. I don't know how many times I had confronted them, how many times I had been shown this betrayal. It all started blending together, like my life was nothing more than a series of repetitions. I tried to leave, but the more I struggled, the more everything twisted, like the apartment itself was alive and wouldn't let me go. It wasn't real. It couldn't be, but it felt so real. Every time I tried to confront them, they would just smile, just say the same words, and the room would shift again. It was like I was caught in an endless cycle, this weird, distorted version of my life where nothing made sense. Every time I thought I figured it out, I was thrown back into the beginning. The apartment was different every time, but the same betrayal played out, over and over again, like a movie on repeat. The feeling of loss, of confusion, never went away. It only got worse. I wanted to scream, I wanted to tear everything apart, but there was nothing to grab hold of. It was like I was trapped in some kind of twisted limbo, endlessly going through the motions, endlessly facing the same heartbreak. I don't know how long I've been here. It's hard to tell. The days blur together. All I know is that every time I think I might be able to escape, every time I think I've broken the cycle, it starts again. And there's nothing I can do to stop it. I don't even know if anyone will ever find me. Maybe I'm not even real anymore. I had always trusted my partner. I didn't question them, not at first. We had a good thing going, or at least I thought we did. But lately, something felt off. It was in the way they would glance at their phone and quickly turn it face down when I walked into the room. It was in the way they seemed distracted, like they were mentally somewhere else, even when they were with me. There was always an excuse, work stress, family stuff, you name it. I told myself I was just overthinking things. But then it happened. One night, after they got home late again, I noticed something strange. Their phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I saw the name pop up, Alyssa. I wasn't the type to snoop, but for some reason, I couldn't help it. I picked up the phone, and there it was. A message that made my stomach drop. It was simple, but the implications were clear. I can't wait to see you tonight. Same hotel? My mind started racing. The hotel? Who the hell was Alyssa? I didn't know any Alyssa. I couldn't even remember my partner ever mentioning anyone by that name. I thought about confronting them right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I decided to follow them the next day. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. So the next night, I followed them. It wasn't hard to do. They left the house just like usual, their car pulling out of the driveway at 8:15 p.m. I gave them a few minutes before I started my engine and trailed behind them at a distance, careful not to be noticed. They took a route I didn't recognize, a back road that led out of the neighborhood. I kept my distance, my hands sweating on the wheel as I followed them all the way to a hotel on the outskirts of town. The parking lot was nearly empty when they pulled in. I parked a few spaces away, trying to make myself as inconspicuous as possible, and watched as they walked into the lobby. They didn't glance around, didn't act like they were hiding anything. If anything, they looked calm, like they knew exactly where they were going. I sat there for a few minutes, my mind going wild with all the possibilities. What was going on? Was this really happening? I waited for what felt like an eternity, and then when I saw them finally exit the lobby, they weren't alone. There was someone with them, someone I didn't recognize, a woman. But that's not what hit me. What hit me was how familiar she looked. She had the same messy hair as me, the same style of clothes, the same damn posture. But it wasn't just that. No, it was more than that. She looked exactly like me, down to the smallest details. The same shape of the nose, the same smile, even the same scars on her left hand where I had burned myself when I was younger. I couldn't move. My chest felt like it was being crushed, like the weight of the realization was pushing the air out of my lungs. I had to be imagining things, right? There was no way this could be real. But the longer I stared, the more I realized I wasn't seeing things. She looked too much like me. It was like looking at a mirror, but in the worst possible way. They walked into the hotel, her hand resting on their arm like they were more than just friends, more than acquaintances. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. I watched them disappear through the door, and my body finally sprang to life. I don't even know why I did it, but I got out of my car and started walking toward the entrance. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought I could confront them, ask them what the hell was going on. Maybe I thought I could stop this before things went any further. But as I stood there in the hotel hallway, about to approach the door to the room, the air around me seemed to shift. I didn't know what it was, but something about the place felt wrong, like a bad dream. I crept closer, trying to make myself as quiet as possible. The door to their room was cracked open just a little. I could hear their voices, muffled, but still clear enough for me to make out some of what they were saying. "You're not gonna tell them, right?" the woman asked. Her voice was my voice, the same pitch, the same tone. It was like hearing myself speak, but twisted. "No, I won't," my partner replied. "They wouldn't understand. It's better this way." I felt like I was going to pass out. The weight of it hit me all at once. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my legs wouldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor. And then it happened. The door creaked open just a little more, and I saw them both. The woman, the clone, was standing there, looking straight at me. My heart dropped. She was looking right at me. I don't know how it happened, but she knew I was there. Her eyes locked with mine through the crack in the door. And she smiled. It wasn't a grin. It wasn't a sad smile or a guilty one. It was a knowing smile. A smile that sent ice through my veins, made the blood rush from my head to my feet. How did she see me? How could she possibly know I was there? I hadn't made a sound. I hadn't given myself away in any way. But she was smiling like she was happy to see me, like she knew me. In that moment, everything felt like it was spinning. My legs gave way beneath me, and I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't process what was happening. I should have run. I should have done anything to get out of there, but I couldn't move. It felt like the world had frozen. And then I heard her voice again. Not the woman's voice, my partner's voice. But now it was directed at me. Through the crack in the door, they were speaking, their tone colder than I had ever heard it. "I didn't want you to find out this way," they said. "But now that you have, maybe it's time." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted back to the woman who looked just like me. She was still standing there, still smiling, like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. I wasn't fine. This wasn't real. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I was about to turn and run, but something stopped me. The woman in the room took a step forward, pushing the door open fully. She was standing there, inches away from me, and I could hear her soft breath, her skin brushing against the doorframe. It was like time had stopped. Her smile never left her face. And then she whispered, soft, almost like a secret, "You shouldn't have looked." I didn't wait for anything else. I turned and ran, my heart racing, my mind screaming. I didn't look back. I didn't care anymore. But deep down, I knew the truth. They weren't cheating on me with someone else. No, they were cheating on me with myself. And the worst part, they didn't even have to hide it anymore. I haven't gone back to that hotel. I haven't confronted them. I haven't spoken to them. Because I'm not sure if I want to know what happens next. I don't go to that hotel anymore. Hell, I don't even go near the area. The whole thing feels like a nightmare, but worse because I can't wake up from it. I haven't spoken to my partner since that night. I tried to reach out a few times, but every message I send goes unanswered. I feel like I'm living in some kind of parallel reality where everything's a little off. I thought about going to the hotel, demanding answers, confronting them both, but I can't bring myself to do it. Every time I get close, something stops me, something I can't quite explain. The worst part? I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I'm being watched. It's subtle at first, like when I'm walking down the street and I catch a glimpse of someone out of the corner of my eye. It's almost like they're following me, but when I turn around, there's no one there. But lately, it's gotten worse. I'll be at home, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, and sometimes I swear I see her. Not the reflection I expect, but her, the woman from that night, the one with my face. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just some weird paranoid trick of my mind, but then I realized I wasn't. Sometimes when I look at myself, it's like she's there too, smiling at me from the reflection. It's as if she's waiting for me, waiting for the right moment to step forward and claim my place. I've stopped looking in mirrors altogether, but it doesn't help. The other day, I was talking to a friend on the phone, just passing time, and when I glanced at the reflection in the window, I saw it, a shadow standing behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. But I know she's still out there. I know she's watching me. And every time I think I can breathe again, the door cracks open just a little more. I thought I had gotten away from it, but maybe there's no escaping something like this. Maybe there never was. The worst part, every time I look in the mirror now, I can't tell if it's my reflection staring back at me or hers. At first, it was subtle, little things. They would be more distant, less affectionate, more easily irritated. We'd be watching TV and they'd pull away like they weren't even there anymore. The way they would stare at their phone and avoid eye contact when we talked, like they were trying to be somewhere else. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe they were just stressed, or maybe I was being paranoid. But then it kept happening, more frequently. The strange silences, the coldness, the way they would go to bed earlier than usual and barely say goodnight. That wasn't like them. Not at all. It made me uneasy, made that little voice in my head grow louder, insisting something wasn't right. So, one night, I did something I never thought I would. I followed them. I wasn't proud of it, but it felt like I had no other choice. It left the house earlier than usual that evening around 7 p.m., looking like they were heading out for a casual night. They didn't even say anything, just grabbed their keys, slipped on a jacket, and walked out the door. No words, no explanation. That was it. I waited for a while, pacing the living room, my stomach tight with anxiety. And then around 20 minutes later, I grabbed my coat, slipped out, and followed them at a distance. The whole time, I felt ridiculous, like a crazy person. But my gut told me I had to know. I had to figure out what was going on. They drove for a while, and I kept my car a few blocks behind, making sure to stay out of sight. After about 20 minutes, they pulled into a small parking lot behind a building I didn't recognize. I parked a little further down the street and stayed in the shadows. I watched them walk into the building, a strange, dimly lit place that had a sign with a name I couldn't make out. It didn't look like a restaurant or any place we'd ever gone to before. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to wait. I wasn't going to just barge in, no matter how badly I wanted answers. I wanted to see what was going on first. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my eyes glued to the door. After about 15 minutes, the door opened again, and there they were, my partner, walking out with someone else. But it wasn't just anyone. It was a woman, and as they walked together, she looked like she was leaning into them, like they were close. The moment I saw that, a chill ran through me, and that little voice in my head screamed at me to turn around, to run before I saw something I couldn't unsee. But I didn't. I couldn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot, watching them get into a car that I'd never seen before. They didn't drive off immediately. No, they sat there for a while talking. The woman was laughing, genuine happy laughter. I couldn't hear the words from where I was, but it was the kind of laughter I hadn't heard from my partner in weeks. many months. Then my heart dropped when my partner leaned in close to the woman's ear. It was a gesture so familiar, so intimate, I couldn't breathe. The woman smiled, and I saw them kiss, softly, briefly, but it was enough to tear through me like a knife. I couldn't keep watching. I felt like I was suffocating, like I was being crushed by the weight of the truth. I turned and ran, not even knowing where I was going. I just needed to get away, to breathe, to process what I had seen. The hurt and anger were boiling inside me, but my legs wouldn't stop, and my thoughts were a jumbled mess of shock and disbelief. I made it home somehow, though I don't remember the walk back. When I got inside, I could barely stand. I was shaking so badly that I had to lean against the kitchen counter to steady myself. But something was wrong. The apartment felt off, like I was being watched. I didn't know what was happening, but the sense of unease grew stronger as I moved through the place. My partner wasn't home yet. I checked my phone, expecting them to have texted by now, but there was nothing. They hadn't said a word. That's when I heard it. The front door creaked open. I turned toward the hallway, my heart racing again, and there they were, my partner. But something wasn't right. Their posture was off, like they were walking differently. A cold shiver ran through me, and I froze. They stepped into the living room, and I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Their eyes met mine, but it wasn't the same. There was no warmth, no familiarity, no recognition. They stood there, silent for a moment, staring at me with a look I couldn't place. Then, without saying a word, they reached up and placed their fingers to their face. I froze, my mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. What was happening? My partner's fingers slid under their skin, pulling gently, almost like peeling off a mask. The skin around their cheeks and jaw began to loosen, and what I thought was my partner's face started to come off, like it was made of latex or something. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My entire body was in shock as I watched my partner's face, peel away, revealing someone else underneath. The person beneath the face was familiar. They had the same height, the same build, but their skin was smoother, their features sharper, more defined. The woman who had kissed my partner just hours before was standing right in front of me, wearing my partner's face. The new face, my partner's face, dropped to the floor with a sickening thud, and the woman smiled at me. It wasn't a smile that comforted me or made sense of what was happening. No, it was a smirk, a cold, knowing smirk. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said, her voice now matching my partner's perfectly. I stood there, unable to form words. My mind was reeling, my world spinning. I couldn't even comprehend what I was seeing. Everything I knew was just shattering. The woman, or whatever she was, took a slow step forward, tilting her head as if she was studying me, as if I were some kind of specimen. "It's a shame," she said, still wearing my partner's face. "You're so attached to that version of them. But the truth is, they weren't real." She paused, letting that sink in. "I'm the real one." I stumbled backward, my hands gripping the back of the couch for support. My head was spinning, and I felt like I might collapse at any second. "I know this is a lot to process," she continued, stepping closer. "But you need to understand that we were never meant to be together. You were always meant to be with me." I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, my thoughts scrambled. The person I had spent years with, the one I had trusted, loved, shared everything with, was never real. I wasn't sure what was happening anymore. I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or if I was stuck in some kind of terrible nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And then, in that moment, I understood. This thing, this being standing in front of me, wearing my partner's face, had been manipulating everything. My relationship, my emotions, my life. It had all been a lie. The worst part? I wasn't sure what came next. Would she leave? Would she stay? Would I ever get my life back? But all I knew for sure was that nothing was ever going to be the same again. I never thought I'd be the type of person to cheat. I'd always prided myself on being honest, on being loyal. But that was before they came into my life, before everything changed. It started out innocent enough. A few glances exchanged, a harmless flirtation here and there. At first, I convinced myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong. My partner and I were having problems, nothing huge, but enough to make me feel distant, disconnected. And then they walked into my life with their charm, their warmth. It felt like they saw me in a way no one else did. I told myself it was just a passing distraction, that I would snap out of it. But I didn't. The affair became something I couldn't control. We kept it secret, of course. I wasn't stupid. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I was in too deep to stop. I tell myself it was just temporary. I tell myself that I'd end it eventually, but I never did. And in the back of my mind, I was always terrified that one day my partner would find out. But I kept pushing that fear away, thinking I was clever enough to keep both lives going. That was until one morning I woke up and they were gone. At first, I thought it was a dream. The bed felt empty, cold. I reached out, but there was no warmth, no familiar body beside me. I blinked, disoriented, and glanced around the room. Their clothes, their things, everything was still there. Their shoes were neatly lined up by the door. Their jacket hung on the chair where they always left it, but they were gone. I don't know why, but something felt wrong. It wasn't just the empty space next to me. It was the way the room felt, like it had been touched by something that shouldn't be there. I sat up, my heart racing. Had they left me? Did they find out? Was it over? My mind spun with questions, with panic. I rushed through the apartment, checking every room, calling their name like a mad person. But they weren't there. They were just gone. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But as the hours passed, the presence in the room didn't fade. The strangest things started happening. I noticed it first with their clothes. Their shirt, which had been left on the edge of the couch, moved, just slightly, like a breeze had passed through the room. But there was no wind. The windows were shut. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, thinking it was my imagination. But then it happened again. Their jacket shifted as though someone had just brushed it, like a hand had lightly grazed the fabric. I didn't know what to do. I told myself it was all in my head, that maybe I was just overtired, or maybe I had a nervous breakdown coming on. But when the scent of them, sweet, familiar, lingered in the air long after they had gone, I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. I couldn't explain it, but I could still smell their perfume in the room, their cologne, the scent that had once felt comforting, but now made my skin crawl. It was as if they were still here, even though they were gone. Every time I walked into the bedroom, it hit me, the heavy, intoxicating scent, filling the space like a presence I couldn't escape. And then the whispers started. At first, I thought I was hearing things. I would be lying in bed at night, trying to sleep, when I would hear a voice. Soft, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. It was their voice, the lover I had betrayed. It wasn't angry, but it wasn't comforting either. It was calm, distant, like they were talking from a faraway place. The first time it happened, I thought I had imagined it, but then the voice came again, clearer this time, as if they were speaking directly into my ear. "You can't escape me." I froze, my heart racing in my chest. My breathing was shallow, my hands clammy. I told myself it was a dream, that I was hearing things in my sleep. But when I opened my eyes, the room was dark, and I was alone. No one was there. But I could still hear them. It kept happening, night after night. The whispers, their voice, soft, haunting words that seemed to be coming from nowhere, but everywhere at once. The words they spoke weren't just random sentences. They were things only someone who knew me, who had been with me, could know. "You never really loved them, did you? They never knew about me. You still think about me, don't you?" Each night, the whispers grew clearer, more intense, until it felt like the air around me was thick with their presence. I couldn't escape it. I would close my eyes and try to drown it out, but it would always find a way in, creeping under my skin like poison. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. I thought maybe it was just my mind again, playing tricks on me in the darkness, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone walking around the apartment. Soft, deliberate steps, moving through the rooms like they knew the place like the back of their hand. I was frozen, paralyzed in my bed, not daring to move, too terrified to even breathe. My eyes darted around the room, but the shadows were too thick, too suffocating. And then I heard it, the whisper, right next to my ear. I told you, you can't escape me. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but the room was empty. The air felt heavier, like something was there, something that shouldn't be. I rushed to the door, slamming it shut, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, lingered. Days passed, and nothing got better. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being haunted, followed by a presence that refused to let go. Every time I tried to leave the house, every time I tried to get away from it, I would feel their gaze, feel their breath on the back of my neck. And when I returned, their clothes would be waiting, the scent lingering, and the whispers growing louder. But the worst part, one night I was standing in front of the mirror, trying to pull myself together, when I saw it. Their reflection. It wasn't just my own face staring back at me anymore. No, their face, my lover's face, was standing there behind me, right next to me, smiling. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but there was no one there. The mirror was empty. I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind or if something else is happening to me, but I know one thing for sure. They're still here. Their presence lingers like a shadow, following me everywhere I go. I feel like I'm being suffocated by it, by what I've done. The whispers never stop. And every time I think I'm free, every time I think it's over, they come back. It's as if they never left. And I wonder, if I close my eyes and listen carefully enough, will I ever stop hearing them? Or will I always be haunted by the lover I betrayed, the one who now lingers in the silence of my every breath? I remember that night like it was yesterday. It was the kind of moment I had dreaded, but deep down, I always knew it would come. I had my suspicions for weeks. My partner had been distant, their behavior changing in ways I couldn't ignore, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth. I found the messages, the photos. It was all there, in black and white. They were cheating, with multiple people. I wish I could say I was surprised, or that I was angry in the way I imagined I would be. But no, I wasn't just angry. I was numb. I was done. I felt like I'd been slowly suffocating for months. And now, with that one discovery, I could finally breathe again. Except, of course, that I couldn't. Not really. Not when everything felt so empty. I didn't even confront them directly. Maybe I should have. But what was the point? The betrayal was out in the open, and there was no coming back from it. Instead, I packed my things, threw the last of my belongings into a duffel bag, and walked out. I didn't care about the explanations. I didn't want any. I was done. But as I stood by the door, the weight of everything crashing down on me, I muttered something under my breath. It wasn't a curse, but a wish. A pathetic, desperate wish. I hope you never get to escape me. I hope you have to feel what I felt over and over again. I know it sounds dramatic. It sounds childish, even, but I didn't care. I was hurting. And in that moment, all I wanted was for them to feel the same. I had given them my everything, and they had destroyed it without a second thought. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe I was asking for something I didn't fully understand. But that was the last thing I said before I left. The next morning, I woke up with an uneasy feeling in my gut. At first, I thought it was just the aftermath of the sleepless night. But something was wrong. I couldn't shake it. The air felt thicker, as if something had changed overnight, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I went through my morning routine, tried to get on with my life. I kept myself busy, knowing I'd eventually have to deal with what had happened. I couldn't keep running away from the pain, but I also couldn't face it head on. Not yet, not when it still felt like I was suffocating. It wasn't until later that day that I began to notice it, the weirdness. At first, it was small. Little things I couldn't quite put my finger on. The barista at the coffee shop, for example, he had the same eyes as my ex, the same piercing, icy blue eyes that had always caught my attention. But it was just a passing moment, I thought. Maybe I was seeing things. But then later, I ran into a woman I knew from a mutual friend's party. She was wearing a red dress I had seen my ex wear before. It wasn't the same dress, but the shape, the style, it was eerily similar. I didn't think too much of it at first, but then, as I looked closer, I noticed something else. Her smile. The way it curled at the edges, like she knew something I didn't. It reminded me so much of my ex's smile, the smile they gave me when they wanted to hide their true feelings, when they were pretending to be someone they weren't. I started to feel a little freaked out, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. I had been under a lot of stress after all. Maybe I was just projecting my hurt onto other people. That was until I saw the man at the grocery store. He was tall, dark-haired, and built like my ex, muscular, but not overly so. He had the same broad shoulders, the same strong jawline. And when he looked up at me, I swore to God, it was like staring into my ex's face. He even had the same voice. I froze in place as he approached the aisle where I was standing, and just as he passed by, he glanced over at me with an expression that was a perfect replica of the one I'd seen 1,000 times on my ex's face. His eyes, my ex's eyes, locked onto mine, and for a split second, I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Hey," he said, his voice low, warm, almost comforting. But I could see the smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth, just like my ex used to do. It made me feel nauseous. Before I could answer, he turned away and walked down the aisle, disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But I couldn't. I could feel it now. Something was definitely wrong. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. And it wasn't just in the way people looked like my ex. It was the way they acted, the way they moved, the way they smiled at me like they knew me. I didn't know how to explain it, but I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. It wasn't just a resemblance anymore, it was more than that. It was like they were becoming my ex. The next few days were a blur. People I saw, strangers I encountered, they all had something in common, something that made my skin crawl. Every single person I came across, no matter where I was, seemed to take on more and more of my ex's appearance. It started with their eyes. Then it was their smile. Soon, even their posture and the way they moved began to feel like a mirror of my ex's movements. It wasn't the same person, but it was close enough that I couldn't tell the difference. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the whispering. It started in the middle of the night. I woke up, startled by a faint sound. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then it came again. The soft murmur of a voice that seemed to float through the air, creeping into my thoughts. "You can never leave me." It was my ex's voice. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I looked around the room, but it was empty. No one was there, just the darkness pressing in on me like a suffocating weight. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "You can never leave me, no matter where you go, no matter who you're with." I looked down at the sheets beside me, and there it was, the same scent. That familiar, intoxicating scent I had once loved, but now associated with nothing but betrayal. It was on the pillow, in the air. It lingered, thick and suffocating. But the worst part was the next morning. I woke up, groggy and disoriented, and as I stumbled into the bathroom, I saw it. The mirror reflected not just my face, but theirs. My ex's face, staring back at me. I slammed my hand against the mirror, shaking, but the reflection didn't change. My ex's eyes, those familiar, haunting eyes, watched me from the other side. "You can never leave me," the voice whispered again, this time louder, more forceful. "You wanted me to suffer, but now you'll never escape." I backed away, my head spinning, but no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape them. It was like they were everywhere I looked, in every face, every touch, every glance. Each person I met slowly morphed into the same reflection of my ex. And it was like they were all aware of me. They knew me. They knew what I had done. And now it was too late. I had made my wish, and I had sealed my fate. The voice would never stop. The whispers would never end. I could never leave them. No matter what I did, they were with me, and they would always be with me. My partner had been acting strange, distant, always coming up with excuses. They'd never been this secretive before, and there was something in their eyes that made me feel like they were hiding something. I didn't know what it was, but I needed to find out. I was already on edge. That afternoon, I found a key, a spare key to a place I didn't recognize. I had no idea where it led to or why they had it, but something in me, something dark and knowing, told me it wasn't for a friend's house or a family member or anything normal. No, it felt like it was meant for something else. I didn't want to believe it, I didn't want to think that my partner was capable of anything like this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was being kept in the dark. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I followed them. I waited until they left. Then I took the key and drove to the address I had found. The whole way there, my hands were shaking, my thoughts scattered. Every scenario played out in my mind, each one worse than the last. What if I was about to walk into something I couldn't take back? What if I found out they had been seeing someone else? What if I was making a huge mistake? But deep down, I knew I had to do it. I needed answers. When I pulled up to the building, it was nothing like I expected. It was an old, nondescript apartment complex, tucked away in a part of town I had never even heard of. It wasn't the kind of place you'd casually rent out. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I parked in the alley behind the building, out of sight, and made my way to the entrance. The key slid into the lock easily. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and for a moment I stood there, holding my breath. The place felt cold. It felt empty, like it hadn't been touched in years. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it, that feeling of being watched. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks. There was something wrong here. I wandered through the dark, narrow hallway, the walls lined with old paintings and dusty shelves. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in months. It didn't look like the kind of place anyone would call home. But the more I looked, the more I realized how perfect it was. Perfectly clean, perfectly sterile, too perfect. When I reached the end of the hallway, I found it. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. What I found inside made my blood run cold. At first, I thought I was seeing things. There, in the middle of the room, standing in front of a large mirror, was a figure. A lifelike figure. The mannequin stood in place, dressed in clothes that were exactly like the ones I wore. Even the color, the fabric, it was all mine. I felt my stomach twist. The mannequin had my features. The same hair, the same eyes, the same shape of my face. It was me, but it wasn't. It was as if someone had taken a mold of my every feature and dressed it up like a doll. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. How could this be possible? Why would anyone do this? I stepped forward slowly, my hands trembling. I reached out, touching the mannequin's arm. The surface felt unnervingly real. The texture of the clothes, the lifelike quality of the skin. It all screamed human, even though I knew it couldn't be. But then something happened. The mannequin's head turned. I froze. My heart slammed into my chest. The head moved, slowly, deliberately, as though it was turning to face me. My blood turned to ice, and I felt my body lock up in shock. And then she smiled. A cold, mechanical smile, but a smile nonetheless. The figure's lips parted, and I heard the words, soft and eerie, come out of her mouth. "I was waiting for you." My legs buckled beneath me, and I stumbled backward, my pulse roaring in my ears. I wanted to scream to run, but I couldn't. My body was rooted to the spot, like I had been paralyzed. For a moment, I stood there, too terrified to speak, too terrified to move. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to process the impossible. Why was there a mannequin of me in this apartment? Why did it look exactly like me? I took a shaky step back, and the mannequin's eyes tracked my movement, following me like a predator. The smile never left her face. I turned quickly and grabbed the door, slamming it shut behind me, but I couldn't breathe. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every sound I heard, every creak of the floorboards, it felt like it was coming from that mannequin, like it was alive. I stumbled down the hallway, trying to get away from the room, but the feeling of her presence didn't leave. I ran to the door, throwing it open, and nearly tripped as I fled outside into the cold night air. It wasn't until I was sitting in my car, gasping for breath, that I realized the truth. I had just seen a lifelike mannequin of myself, dressed in my clothes, waiting for me in that apartment. But I couldn't shake what she said. "I was waiting for you." The words echoed in my mind as I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong everything had been. That smile, that cold, empty smile, haunted me. It was as if she had been expecting me, waiting for me. But who was she? And why did she look like me? The worst part was that I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. The mannequin's face. The way she smiled. The way she knew I was coming. When I got home, I tried to put it out of my mind, tried to tell myself it was just a trick, some strange illusion. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something sinister about it all, something wrong. The worst part came the next morning. As I opened my closet, I saw my clothes, the same clothes the mannequin had worn, but this time, they looked different. They were disheveled, like they had been worn. I reached for the shirt, and I found a note inside. It was written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. "I'm still here. I'll always be here. You can't escape me." The words hit me like a slap in the face, and I felt the room spin around me. I couldn't breathe. I could barely think. The mannequin was still waiting for me. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to forget what I had seen, she would always be there, waiting, watching. And I had no idea what she wanted, but one thing was certain, she wasn't going anywhere. It started so quietly, so innocently, I almost didn't notice it. The affair. I'd been cheating for months, convinced it was just a phase, something I could get away with without anyone finding out. It wasn't as if I was doing it to hurt my partner. I convinced myself I wasn't that bad. But as the days went on, the guilt crept in, slowly but surely. Still, I kept telling myself I could end it whenever I wanted, that I could keep it hidden and everything would go back to normal. Then, one morning, everything changed. I woke up, and there it was, a note. It was sitting on the pillow next to me, folded neatly, as if it had been placed there deliberately. I could still smell the faint remnants of my partner's scent in the sheets, and the soft light filtering through the curtains cast a warm glow across the room. For a second, I thought maybe it was just a weird dream, but when I reached over and picked it up, the words on the note sent a shiver through my spine. "You belong to me now." I felt my blood run cold, my heart started racing, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My first thought was that it was a joke. Someone was messing with me. Maybe a prank from one of my friends. But then I looked at the handwriting. The letters were so precise, so deliberate. No one I knew wrote like that. And the words, those words didn't feel like a joke. They felt like a threat. I glanced around the room, my mind spiraling into paranoia. My partner was still asleep beside me, breathing softly. They didn't seem to have noticed anything odd, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something deeply wrong. I stood up, my legs shaky, and went to the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face. When I looked up at the mirror, I froze. I didn't see my reflection at first, not clearly. It was as if the image was off, a little too blurry, like the glass had fogged over, but it wasn't. My reflection was fine, except there was something else. A dark, shadowy figure standing just behind me, its shape indistinct and shrouded in darkness. I could see it clearly now, standing just out of reach, just behind my own reflection. I blinked, and it was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I turned quickly to look behind me, but the room was empty. My partner was still asleep in bed, unaware of the creeping sense of dread that was clawing at my chest. I tried to rationalize it. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. Maybe I was still groggy from sleep. I couldn't let myself get paranoid. But as the day went on, the feeling didn't leave. I couldn't shake the idea of that figure standing behind me, so dark, so silent. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt its presence, lurking just beyond my reach. It was always there, but when I turned to check, it never seemed to be, just a shadow, a presence. I couldn't explain it, but it was suffocating, and it was like the figure knew me. I could feel its eyes on me, though I could never see its face. I turned my head, and I could feel it still there, staring at me, just out of my view. It wasn't just the mirrors, it was everywhere. The more I saw it, the more I realized it was attached to me somehow. Like it was my shadow, but wrong. A shadow that didn't belong. The whispers started that night. I had gone to bed, exhausted from a long day of trying to push the terrifying thoughts out of my mind. I rolled over in the dark, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease that settled over me like a thick blanket. Then, just as I closed my eyes, the whispering started. It was faint at first, just a soft murmur, something I couldn't make out. But as it grew louder, the words became clear. You belong to me now. You cannot escape. The voice sent a chill down my spine, and I sat up abruptly, my heart hammering. The room was dark, but I could feel it there, lurking in the shadows, pressing in on me from all sides. I glanced over at my partner, still asleep, oblivious to the terror that was suffocating me. I reached over and touched their shoulder, needing reassurance that the world was still normal, but it wasn't. It couldn't be. I heard it again, the voice. You belong to me now. You'll never escape. I threw the covers off, my legs unsteady, and ran to the bathroom. My hands shook as I flicked on the light, and I couldn't look at the mirror. I couldn't. I already knew what I would see, and I didn't want to see it again. But I had to. I had to look. I slowly turned my face toward the mirror, half closed my eyes, bracing myself. The shadowy figure was there, standing just behind me, its form growing more solid. The face was almost clear now, just a flicker in the reflection. I could see a faint outline, a pair of glowing eyes, but they weren't my eyes. They were cold, empty, hungry. I gasped and took a step back, but the reflection didn't move. The figure just stayed there, perfectly still, watching me. And then it whispered again, its voice low and slow, as if savoring every word. You can't run from me. You belong to me now, forever. I tried to leave, tried to turn away from the mirror, but something stopped me. My eyes were locked on the figure now. My body refused to obey me. I felt like I was being dragged into it, like it was pulling me closer, wrapping around me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I ran out of the bathroom, into the living room, pacing, trying to breathe, trying to think. I couldn't be losing my mind. I wasn't crazy. But I was starting to feel like I was, like the walls were closing in on me and there was no escape. But no matter how far I went, no matter what I did, the figure was always there. It followed me in every reflection, in every surface. I saw it in store windows, in car mirrors, in the windows of buildings I passed. It was always standing behind me watching. And the voice never stopped. You belong to me now. You can't escape. The worst part was that I knew the figure. I recognized it. It was me, but it wasn't. I thought I was just losing my mind, but then it happened. My partner woke up the next morning, and they looked at me like they knew. They looked at me with that knowing, cold look in their eyes, like they had seen through me, seen the truth all along. And then the worst thing happened. I saw them looking at me, their eyes wide, their face paling. They looked at me with horror. But they weren't looking at me. They were looking at the figure, behind me, in the mirror. I turned quickly, my heart thundering in my chest. But when I looked at my reflection, I was alone. There was no shadowy figure standing behind me. But the voice still whispered, You belong to me now. You'll never escape. I looked back at my partner, but they weren't looking at me anymore. They were staring at the wall, their eyes glazed, their lips trembling. I didn't know how, but I knew then I had made a deal. A terrible, terrible deal. And now, no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, I couldn't escape. The figure would always be there. I belonged to it now. Something about it all had felt off, but I didn't want to believe it. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the quiet little lies slipping out of their mouth like water, always just enough to make me second-guess myself. But I couldn't deny it anymore. I had to know the truth, no matter what. I followed them one night. I didn't know where they were going, but I knew something was wrong. I had been feeling it for weeks, that nagging, crawling feeling in the pit of my stomach. The way they'd been pulling away, the way they wouldn't look me in the eye. It was like they had become a stranger overnight, and I was done wondering. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I followed them. They drove out of the city, heading for some remote part of the countryside. The streets grew quieter, the houses fewer, the trees thicker. I stayed far behind, just enough to make sure I wasn't seen, but close enough to keep track of their movements. I tried to calm my racing heart, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were meeting a friend. Maybe they just needed space. But then they turned off the main road and pulled into a long driveway, the kind that looked like it hadn't been used in years, the kind that led to nowhere. I parked a few yards back, hiding in the shadows of the trees, my mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. I watched them get out of the car and walk toward a crumbling, abandoned house. The kind of house that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself, with boarded-up windows, peeling paint, and a broken porch that creaked under their weight. Something in me felt a shift. This wasn't just some lover's rendezvous. This was wrong. I stayed there for a while, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I debated what to do. I wanted to turn around, to leave, to pretend I never saw any of this. But I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. I had to know who they were meeting. So I waited for a moment when the shadows were long enough and slipped out of my car. I moved quickly, keeping low, not wanting to be seen. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay as I made my way toward the house. The door creaked open as I approached. I didn't even think about it. I just pushed it open and stepped inside. The house was dark, the air musty and stale. I could feel the floor beneath my feet shifting, like the house itself was shifting with me. It was old, no doubt, but something felt alive. I didn't hear any voices, no laughter, no conversation. It was eerily quiet. The silence pressed down on me, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. I took another step into the house, my breath hitching in my throat. The floor groaned beneath me, the walls seemed to lean in closer. I walked deeper, my eyes scanning the dimly lit interior, searching for signs of life. It felt like the walls were breathing, slow, deep inhales and exhales that sent an unnerving shiver down my spine. Then I heard it, a soft click. The door behind me slammed shut, and I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The house was alive. I spun around, panic rising in my chest. The door was no longer where it had been. It was gone, replaced by a solid wall of wood and crumbling plaster. I pressed my hands to the surface, my palms sweating. There was no way out now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. No, I couldn't let panic take over. I had to find them. I had to figure out what was going on. I pushed forward, walking through the hallways, the walls seeming to close in tighter with each step. The house moaned, the floorboards creaking underfoot, the air growing heavier, colder. And then I saw it. A door slightly ajar at the end of a long hallway. There was a dim light seeping out from the cracks around it, and the moment I saw it, I knew something was inside, something that didn't belong. I moved toward it, my footsteps soft on the rotting floorboards, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to run. But I couldn't, not now. I pushed the door open, my eyes scanning the dark room inside. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The walls were lined with mirrors, old, tarnished mirrors that reflected 1,000 different angles of the room. But it wasn't just the mirrors that made my stomach twist. It was the shadows. There were so many of them, shifting in the corners, creeping along the floor. And then I saw them. My partner. But they weren't alone. They were standing with someone I didn't recognize. But it wasn't just one person. The room was filled with them. People, faces. But they weren't just standing there, smiling or talking like normal people. No, they were pressed up against the walls, trapped. Their eyes were wide with fear, their mouths open in silent screams. They were stuck, frozen, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions, as if they were part of the house itself. And the worst part, they all looked familiar, every single one of them. The faces of people my partner had been with. I felt bile rise in my throat. These were the people they had cheated with, the ones who had been in their life, their bed. And now they were trapped. The house had taken them. The house was feeding on them. And now I was next. I backed away, my chest tightening, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air thick with a rancid, choking smell. The figures in the mirrors, they weren't just reflections. They were real. They were watching me, and some of them were moving, their eyes following my every move, their mouths opening in silent pleas. I turned and ran, but the house wouldn't let me go. Doors slammed shut behind me, walls shifted, the floors buckled beneath my feet. I could feel it, the weight of something massive, hungry, shifting around me. I stumbled through the hallways, trying to find an escape, but the house twisted and turned, as if it were playing a cruel game. The voices started to rise, faint whispers, moaning, calling to me. "You belong here now," they said. "You'll never leave." I pushed harder, trying to escape, but the house was alive with hunger. And the worst part? I realized I wasn't just being hunted by the house. I was becoming part of it. I made it to the front door, desperate to escape, but when I reached for the handle, it snapped shut. I slammed my hands against the glass, my face pressed to it, my vision blurring with panic. The shadows were closing in on me. And then, through the cracks in the wall, I saw them. The people trapped in the house, the ones my partner had betrayed me with, their faces twisted, pleading. They were screaming now, their mouths open wide, but no sound came. They were being swallowed by the walls, disappearing, one by one, into the darkness. I screamed. The house was feeding on them, and I was next. I pounded on the door, desperate, frantic, but it wouldn't budge. The walls closed in, and the whispers got louder. "You're ours now," they said. "You'll never leave." I kept slamming my fists against the door, my heart racing so fast I could barely breathe. The house seemed to pulse around me, the walls closing in, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, like it was feeding on my fear. Every corner I turned, every door I tried to open, the house just shifted, trapping me, keeping me inside. There was no escape, no way out. I could feel the walls pressing against me, squeezing me into the space, suffocating me, and all I could think about was how those trapped figures, the ones my partner had betrayed me with, were still there. Frozen in place, lost in time, screaming silently as they became part of the house. The same thing was happening to me. I could feel it. My skin tingled with a horrible sense of inevitability. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling, but the house didn't let me fall. It caught me, like it had caught them. I could hear the walls whisper, the house's breath, low and steady, like some enormous beast in slumber, waiting for the next soul to devour. In the distance, I saw my partner. They were still there, standing in the center of the room, their back turned to me. My legs shook, my body aching with exhaustion, but I had to face them. They were the reason I was here. They were the reason I was being claimed by this twisted, hungry place. I stumbled toward them, calling their name, though it came out as more of a rasp than a sound. They didn't turn around, not until I was right there, standing behind them. When they finally faced me, their expression was blank, almost relieved. And that's when I saw it, the thing that had been gnawing at my sanity since the moment I stepped into this place. Their eyes were different. Not the eyes I had loved, the ones I had trusted. These eyes, these were empty, dark, lifeless. And that smile, that twisted grin that spread across their face was something I couldn't understand. Something wrong. "You're here now," they said, their voice flat and cold, just like the others. I froze, a sick realization crawling into my mind. They knew. They had known this would happen. This was the consequence, the price of the betrayal, and I was just one more person to be consumed by the house. Just one more body to join the others, trapped forever in the walls, feeding its hunger. I felt the chill run through me, like I was already slipping away, becoming part of it. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, my body shaking uncontrollably. The house was alive again, the walls shifting, twisting. The figures, those people who had been with my partner, were moving now. Their bodies were distorted, half-formed, flickering between the spaces of reality and the house's madness. Their eyes met mine, desperate, pleading, and they reached out toward me. Their silent screams echoed in my head, and then I understood. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about consumption, about the house taking every piece of those it claimed. Every kiss, every whispered promise, every stolen moment had led me here. And now I was part of its collection. I would never leave. I turned to face the door again, but it was too late. The walls closed around me, the air heavy and thick, the house pulling me into its very core. I felt myself being sucked into the floor, my limbs going numb as the darkness swallowed me whole. I screamed, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of the house's hungry moan, its breath rising with a sinister satisfaction. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't escape. The house had me now. And just before everything went black, I heard it one last time. You belong to us now. And then there was nothing, only silence. I never thought I'd be that person. You know, the one who spies on their partner, obsessively watching for signs of betrayal. But here I was, pacing around the apartment at 2 a.m., my mind racing. For weeks, I had this feeling, like something was off, like I wasn't the only one sharing their bed. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just my insecurities, the stress of work, whatever. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I would notice little things, distant glances, too many late nights out, those "I'm just tired" excuses. And don't even get me started on the change in the way they looked at me. It wasn't the same. It was colder, more distant, as if I wasn't enough anymore. I tried to talk about it, but every time I was brushed off. "You're imagining things," they'd say, or "I'm just busy with work." But deep down I knew, and I couldn't take it anymore. That's when I decided to do something about it. I had to know for sure what was really going on when I wasn't around. I bought the camera, a tiny hidden one that could be easily tucked in a corner. It didn't take much effort to install, and it was nearly impossible to detect. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. The fear of being lied to was eating me alive. If I was going to be betrayed, I wanted to see it for myself. A few nights later, I sat down at my desk, my fingers trembling as I loaded the footage. I expected the usual, some shady figure creeping into our bedroom while I was out, or them sneaking around when they thought I wasn't looking. What I saw, though, wasn't even close to what I'd imagined. At first, nothing seemed unusual. My partner and I were both in bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. I watched as we both settled in for the night, my partner's back turned to me, as usual, their body language stiff and distant. But as the camera's clock ticked on, I noticed something strange. Around 2:45 a.m., the attic hatch in the corner of the room, the one I had never really paid attention to, began to creak open. Slowly, a figure began to emerge from the hole, crawling down like something unnatural, something that didn't belong. I froze, my pulse quickening. What the hell was that? The figure was tall, but hunched, moving with an unsettling, unnatural grace. It was hard to make out details in the dim light, but I could tell it was human, or at least it looked human. My stomach turned as I watched the figure slip out of the attic and silently crawl into the bed beside my partner. My partner didn't even stir, didn't flinch when this person slid into our bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. I leaned in closer to the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The figure crawled into place beside my partner, its face now almost clear in the low light. But what shocked me more than its appearance was the way it moved, the way it interacted. It wasn't like they were startled or confused by someone sneaking into their bed. They welcomed it. The figure, now sitting up beside them, leaned over and whispered something in my partner's ear, something too soft for me to catch through the camera's audio. But my partner didn't pull away. They didn't even seem to notice that something was wrong. Instead, they rolled over slightly, as if making room for them. The figure lay down, its body curled up beside my partner's, and they stayed like that for hours. The entire night was a blur of quiet movements, soft whispers, and the occasional low murmur. My partner would respond in hushed tones, then the figure would whisper something back. I watched the two of them share these private moments, whispers I couldn't hear, touches I couldn't see clearly. But the intimate nature of it was undeniable. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Who was this person? Why hadn't I noticed anything strange before? Why was my partner so at ease with them? I wanted to believe it was some kind of bizarre dream, that I was just seeing things. But the evidence was right there, staring at me through the screen. And then, just as quietly as it had come, the figure slid out of bed and crawled back into the attic, disappearing into the shadows above. The hatch closed behind them with a faint creak, and the room returned to stillness. My partner, completely unaware of what had just happened, rolled over and went back to sleep. I sat there, motionless, my heart thundering in my chest. It wasn't a lover. It wasn't someone they were seeing behind my back, or at least not in the way I thought. This was something darker, something I couldn't explain. I had always known there was something wrong, but I never imagined it would be this. What was that thing in the attic? Why had my partner been so calm, so accepting of his presence? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't just some fleeting affair. This wasn't just a case of betrayal or cheating. This was something else entirely. And the worst part was, it wasn't over. The attic hatch creaked open again in my mind. I could almost hear the whispers. I tried to tell a few friends about it, but they just laughed it off. Maybe it sounds too insane for them to get it. I don't know. But honestly, if you were in my shoes, I don't think you find it funny at all. In fact, you'd probably be freaking out as much as I am. So, here's the thing. I caught my partner cheating. It wasn't some random one-time thing. It wasn't even just a kiss or a flirtation. No, it was a full-on relationship. She'd been seeing someone else for months. I found out through a bunch of small signs, texts, late-night calls, weird behavior. But the real kicker was when I found the pictures. I don't know what made me look through her phone that day. I wasn't suspicious at first, but something felt off, you know. So I looked, and there they were. The photos were all I needed. It was like she was living a whole other life behind my back. I remember feeling like I was about to explode. All the anger I'd been holding in, all the confusion, all the hurt, it was all just too much. I confronted her, obviously. I think I screamed more than I said anything. She cried, apologized, begged me to understand. I don't know what I was expecting, but what she said didn't make it better. She kept saying she was sorry, that she never meant for it to happen, that it was a mistake. But here's the thing, I was done. I had enough. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses, her "I'm so sorry" speeches. I felt like I was drowning, like I couldn't breathe properly because of how heavy the betrayal felt. But the weirdest thing happened. As much as I hated it, a part of me, maybe it was because we'd been together for so long, actually wanted to forgive her. I don't even know why. I guess I just wanted things to go back to how they were before all of this. So I agreed. I told her I'd try to forgive her, try to make it work. It felt like the right thing to do in the moment, even though a part of me was screaming to just walk away. I went to bed that night feeling like I had made a huge mistake. It was almost like I was being swallowed whole by the decision, but I just couldn't bring myself to end it. I didn't want to lose her. Even after everything, I didn't want to lose the person I thought I knew. But when I woke up the next morning, something felt off. I didn't know what it was at first. I just chalked it up to being tired or still processing everything that had happened. But as I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen, I heard it, her voice, saying the same exact thing she said the night before, word for word. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, and I'll do anything to make it right." At first, I just stared at her, thinking I was losing my mind. I figured I had to be hearing things. Maybe I'd just woken up from a weird dream. But no, it wasn't a dream. It was real. She was standing there in the kitchen, looking just like she had the night before, saying the exact same thing. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and tried to shake off the weird feeling. Maybe I was just tired or something. So I shook my head, tried to focus, and went about my morning. But it didn't stop. It didn't stop at all. The next day, I woke up again. Same thing. She was there, in the same spot, with the same words coming out of her mouth. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, and I'll do anything to make it right." I tried to tell myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe I was just imagining things, but it kept happening, over and over. Every single morning, she would say the same thing. It was like she was trapped in a loop, saying the same apology on repeat, without any change in tone, in expression, in anything. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. It felt like I was stuck in some weird time warp where the same day kept repeating itself. But no matter how much I tried to shake it off, it kept happening. I tried to talk to her about it, But whenever I asked if she was saying the same thing again, she would just look at me like I was crazy. She had no idea what I was talking about. She wasn't repeating anything. She wasn't aware of the pattern, the loop. She couldn't remember what had happened the day before. It was like I was the only one who knew. I could feel my grip on reality slipping with every passing day. I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't know how to make it stop. I'd wake up in the morning, and there she was, standing in the kitchen, saying the same thing. The worst part? She looked exactly the same every time. Her face was locked in the same expression, like she had no control over it. It was like she was a puppet, and someone was pulling the strings, making her do this over and over again. I'd start to get mad, start to yell, but it never changed anything. There was no way I could explain it to anyone. How could I? Hey, I think my partner's stuck in some kind of weird loop, repeating the same apology every day. Doesn't exactly sound like something you say to your best friend, does it? People would just think I was going crazy, and honestly, I was starting to think I was too. I tried everything. I tried changing my routine to see if that would break the cycle. I went to bed at different times, tried to sleep in, tried waking up earlier. But no matter what I did, it was the same. I'd wake up, and there she was, standing in the same spot, with the same apology on repeat. By the third day of this, I was a mess. I barely slept, I was barely eating, and I had no idea what was real anymore. I didn't know if this was some sort of punishment from the universe for forgiving her, or if I was just losing my mind. I tried to confront her about it again, but all she'd say was, "What are you talking about? I'm not repeating anything." I don't even know why I kept going. Maybe it was because I thought it might stop if I just tried to ignore it. Maybe I thought if I just acted normal, everything would go back to normal, but it didn't. It never did. By the fifth day, I started avoiding her. I couldn't stand hearing the same words come out of her mouth every single morning. It was driving me insane. I'd go to the living room, shut myself in the bathroom, anything to not hear it. But no matter where I went, there she was, standing there apologizing. I felt like I was losing my grip on everything. It was like being stuck in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. And as time went on, I realized something else. It wasn't just the apology that was repeating. Everything was. Her actions, her words, her appearance, they were all locked in this endless cycle, like a broken record playing the same part over and over again. The weirdest part, she had no idea. She wasn't aware of the loop. She didn't remember anything from the day before, and no matter how much I tried to explain it, it never clicked for her. She just kept apologizing, and I kept getting more and more frustrated. I don't even know how much longer I can take this. I feel like I'm going crazy. Every day is the same. Every morning is the same. Her apology is the same. And no matter what I do, nothing changes. It's like I'm stuck in some kind of nightmare, and I don't know how to wake up. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe I'm not, but who's to say? All I know is I can't keep living like this. Something has to give. Something has to change. But I don't know what that is or how it'll happen. All I know is every morning when I wake up, she's there, repeating the same words again. And I'm starting to think I'm stuck in this loop too. You know how some things just don't feel right, even when you can't put your finger on why? That's how it started. It wasn't a huge moment, nothing dramatic or out of the ordinary. Just odd. It was a weird little thing, but it stuck with me. I didn't think much of it at first. I should have. I was getting ready for work one morning, just doing my usual routine. You know, the standard coffee, brush teeth, get dressed. But when I walked into the bedroom, I noticed something strange. It wasn't loud or in your face, but it was there. A red string. A thin, bright red thread tied around my partner's wrist. At first, I thought I was just seeing things. I mean, it was barely visible, tucked under the sleeve of their shirt. It wasn't like it was glowing or anything, but the color of it stood out against the dark fabric. It seemed harmless enough. Maybe it was some silly bracelet they'd gotten from a friend, something they were wearing for luck or as a fashion statement. It didn't matter. I didn't think about it much as I went about my day. But then when I came back to the bedroom that night, I noticed it again. The red string was still there, hanging loosely on their wrist, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I almost asked about it. Maybe I should, but I didn't. Honestly, I wasn't sure why. It just seemed so unimportant. It didn't seem like something worth asking about, you know? Like, we all have weird little quirks, right? A piece of thread on their wrist? Whatever. No big deal. But the next morning, that's when I really started to pay attention. I walked into the room, and for the first time, I noticed something more than just the red string. The thread wasn't just resting there on their wrist anymore. It was stretching, moving, like it was pulling itself under the bedroom door. My heart skipped a beat, and my mind raced through 1,000 different possibilities. Was it something they tied in a moment of weird superstition? Had they been playing with it the night before? Was there some other explanation? I could have brushed it off, just left it alone, but something gnawed at me. Maybe it was the way the thread seemed to have grown longer overnight, or how it looked like it was stretching, pulling. I don't know. But I didn't ignore it. I stepped forward, pushed the door open slowly, trying to see what the hell was going on. The moment the door creaked open, I felt a chill run through me. The thread led under the door, right into the closet. I don't know what made me walk over to it. I guess something inside me needed to know what was going on. I wasn't sure if I was scared or just confused. But I opened the closet door, and there in the dark corner was something I wasn't expecting. A body. A decayed skeletal corpse. Its pale, shriveled skin clung to the bones in places, and it was surrounded by a mess of dried-up, brittle flesh. The stench hit me first, a heavy, rotten smell that seemed to have been building up for who knows how long. But the worst part was that the corpse was whispering. It wasn't some eerie, distant sound, like the wind or the creaking of old wood. No, this was right there. A voice. Quiet, but unmistakable. They promised to be mine forever. I froze, staring at it, unsure if I was even breathing anymore. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It was like everything had stopped in that moment. The world had shrunk down to just that one horrifying sight in front of me. The red string, now visible beneath the body, connected from the corpse's wrist and stretched all the way to my partner's wrist, like a tether, linking them to the rotting thing in the closet. My mind raced. How was this possible? What the hell was going on? Why was this here? How had I never noticed the smell before? The voice, soft, almost pleading, whispered again. They promised. They said I'd never be alone. They promised. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry. My hands shook so badly I couldn't even close the closet door. I was stuck, caught in this terrifying moment where the room felt smaller and smaller, like the walls were closing in. My partner had been acting so strange lately, but I never thought anything like this was even remotely possible. They'd been distant, sure, but what was this? What the hell was this? It was only then that I realized something worse. The body in the closet. It looked so familiar. The hair, the clothes, the twisted expression frozen on its face. It was my partner. I staggered back, heart hammering in my chest. I had to be imagining it. It couldn't be. But no, there it was. The body, decayed and almost unrecognizable. But I could see it now. It was my partner. How had I never noticed? How had they been hiding this from me? But there it was, clear as day. The voice grew louder, more desperate. They promised, forever. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. My breath came out in jagged gasps. I didn't know what to do, what to think. My mind was still trying to process what I had just seen. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think about what I had just heard. I had to get out. I had to leave. I didn't even know if I was still awake, if I was dreaming all of this. I turned around, my legs trembling as I made my way back to the bedroom. My partner was still asleep, the same peaceful, innocent expression on their face. But the red string, it was still there, tied tightly around their wrist. And it wasn't just any thread. It was the same exact one that led to the corpse in the closet. What had they promised? Who had promised what? How was this possible? What did this mean? The longer I stared at them, the more I began to feel it. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't normal. I thought I had seen everything there was to see in our relationship, but this was too much. I was in way over my head, and I had no idea how to fix it. I tried to shake the image of the corpse from my mind, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Every time I thought about it, I heard the whisper. They promised to be mine forever. I don't know how much time passed after that. Maybe hours, maybe days. I couldn't get the image out of my head. I couldn't get the voice out of my ears. Every time I looked at my partner, I felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't escape. I couldn't talk to anyone. How could I? Who would believe me? And what would I even say? Hey, I found the body in the closet, and it's whispering about promises forever. It sounded insane. Even I thought it was insane. But I couldn't stop looking at the red thread. Every time I saw it, I felt that cold, creeping fear building inside me again. And the worst part is that every time I tried to ignore it, every time I tried to just get through the day, the string pulled me back. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know. I couldn't live with the uncertainty. I had to understand what was going on. So I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to pull the red string. Just a little tug, just enough to see what would happen. But when I did, the thread snapped and the room seemed to go deeply still. I turned, looking at my partner, still lying in bed, unaware of anything happening around them. But that's when I saw it, something different in their eyes, something darker, something that hadn't been there before. And then the whisper started again, echoing in the back of my head, louder this time, closer. They promised. The thread had broken, but whatever it was that had been holding this all together, it wasn't done yet. It was never done. I decided to snoop that night. Maybe I was just tired of feeling like something wasn't right, or maybe it was the fact that my partner had been acting distant for the past few weeks. Whatever the reason, I ended up going through their stuff. It wasn't even like I was searching for anything in particular, but when I found it, I couldn't look away. The burner phone. It was tucked beneath the cushions of the couch, the kind of place where you'd hide something if you didn't want anyone to find it. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old flip phone. But it wasn't mine, and it wasn't their usual phone. I had no idea they even had a second phone, but as soon as I saw it, I felt my stomach drop. Something about it made me feel like I was about to uncover something I wasn't ready for. I grabbed it, turned it on, and instantly saw that it was filled with messages. Dozens of texts from an unknown number. Most of them were short, just simple, cryptic things. Stuff that made no sense at first glance. But the more I scrolled, the more uneasy I became. Are you alone tonight? I can't wait to see you. Don't worry, I'm coming for you. My hands started to shake. I shouldn't have kept reading, but I did. Every message seemed to dig deeper into whatever this was. Whoever this person was. I couldn't help myself. I was furious, heart racing. What was going on? Why was my partner texting someone else like this? And who the hell was this person? The messages were all from a number that didn't belong to anyone I recognized. The name was unlisted, no details, just a blank space next to it. That's when my head started to spin. I didn't know what was happening, but I was getting a bad feeling in my gut. I had to confront them. Now. I grabbed my own phone, ready to call them out. I was shaking, angry, but there was a sick curiosity in me too. I had to know who they were talking to. I had to know who was sending these messages. So I hit the number. Ringing. Ringing. And then the voice. Don't worry, I'll be home soon. It was calm, too calm, and something about the way they said it made my blood run cold. It wasn't the voice of someone who'd been caught in the act, someone who was nervous or guilty. It was steady, almost reassuring, like they knew exactly what was going on, almost like they were in control of the situation. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The phone felt heavy in my hand, and for a second, I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was happening, what kind of sick game this was. And then, just as the voice finished speaking, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not from the phone, but behind me. They were quiet at first, slow, deliberate steps, like someone was walking toward me. I turned around, my throat going dry. But the room was empty. I was alone. The footsteps kept coming. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, just staring at the empty space behind me. My mind was going crazy, my heart hammering against my chest. What the hell was happening? Was this a prank? Was it one of their friends messing with me? No, this felt too real, too wrong. I had never felt like this before, this deep, crawling sense of dread, like I was being watched. The footsteps were getting closer. I finally snapped out of it, dropping the phone and rushing toward the door. I couldn't explain it, but something told me I needed to get out of that room. I bolted, the sound of my own frantic steps echoing in my ears. My hands were slick with sweat, and I didn't know what to do, where to go. I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, like the air itself was thickening, suffocating me. I ran out into the hallway, took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. My heart was still racing, and my head was spinning. What the hell had just happened? Who was that voice on the phone? And the footsteps. That was the part that really shook me. It wasn't just a sound. It was like someone was right behind me, following me. I felt like I couldn't get away. I had to know what was going on. I had to know who was involved. Was my partner in on this? Or had I stumbled into something I wasn't meant to see? I didn't want to go back to the apartment. I couldn't. But there was no way I could just leave it like this. Leave everything hanging in the air, not knowing. I went back in, slow this time, barely breathing. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The apartment was dead quiet. I waited for something to happen. Nothing. I went straight to the couch where I had found the burner phone. The messages were still there, still haunting the screen. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something. I scrolled through again, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing stood out. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Don't worry, I'll be home soon." My heart froze in my chest. I thought I was seeing things. I swear, I thought I was going crazy. But no, it was the same message, word for word. The same calm, steady voice, echoing back at me, but now it was in a text. I looked up, panic rising in my throat. And that's when I heard it again. The footsteps, louder this time, and closer, getting closer, right behind me. I spun around, my mind scrambling to catch up with the horror that was sinking in. The room was empty. There was nothing there. But I could feel it. I could feel the presence, like someone was right there. I could almost feel their breath on the back of my neck. I backed away from the phone, my entire body shaking. It felt like I was trapped in some twisted game, one where I didn't know the rules and couldn't find the exit. There was something far darker than I could even begin to understand behind all of this. Who was that person on the phone? Why were they saying the same thing over and over? What was going on? And why did it feel like I was being pulled deeper into something I couldn't escape? I don't know what happened next, but I left the apartment. I had to. I couldn't stay there anymore. Couldn't stay in that place where I felt hunted, trapped. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could hear was that calm, steady voice. "Don't worry, I'll be home soon." But now, even when I'm miles away, it follows me. I still hear those footsteps behind me, always just out of sight, always closing in. And I'm terrified of what will happen when they finally catch up to me. I've always prided myself on having a pretty solid memory. It's one of those things I've never really had to think about until that day. That was the day everything changed, the day I found something I wasn't supposed to. It wasn't big. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a few letters tucked away in the back of my partner's drawer. But the moment I saw them, everything went sideways. It started like any other afternoon. I was cleaning up, just tidying around the apartment. Nothing special, just folding laundry and organizing stuff. That's when I noticed the drawer slightly ajar. I knew it was my partner's, and it had always been a bit of a mess. Old receipts, random papers, nothing I thought would be of any interest. But for some reason, that day, I pulled it open. The letters were tucked behind a pile of papers. Their cream-colored edges peeked out just enough for me to notice. I don't know why, but something about them grabbed my attention, pulled me in. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't, but I couldn't help myself. I pulled them out. The first one was addressed in my own handwriting. No name, just "my dearest." The kind of thing I'd write when I was feeling sentimental or loving. But as I read it, I felt off. I had no memory of writing it. The words were familiar, but the sentiment wasn't mine. And the more I read, the worse it got. Each letter, there were several, was written in my handwriting, every word perfectly crafted, the strokes of my pen my style. But I couldn't remember ever writing them. The words felt foreign, like someone else had taken over my hands, controlling them without my knowledge. The dates on them went back months, some even a year. I knew for a fact I hadn't written them. I flipped through the letters, one after another, getting more and more uncomfortable. They were addressed to someone, to a name I didn't recognize, someone called Jack. The letters were full of affection, of promises to return, of longing. Whoever Jack was, he clearly meant a lot to me. Or did he? I felt sick, my stomach tightening. The more I read, the more I realized I had no memory of Jack, no recollection of writing to him, no recollection of ever loving him. Yet these letters spoke as if we'd shared something deep, something real. And worse, the photos that were hidden with them, that didn't make sense. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, they were there, tucked in between the letters. Small, glossy photos of a man with the same features as me, same face, same eyes, same build, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way he looked. His eyes were dead, empty, lifeless. He looked like me, yet he wasn't me. It was like looking at a reflection of myself, but twisted, hollow. It felt like I was staring into something I wasn't supposed to see, something wrong. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, the weight of the letters heavy in my hands, my heart racing. My mind was reeling, trying to piece together what the hell was going on. How could I have written these letters? Why didn't I remember them? And who the hell was this Jack? Why did I have photos of someone who looked like me? Someone I didn't recognize? I had to know. I needed to understand what I was missing, what was happening to me. I took the letters and photos to my partner. They were in the kitchen, humming to themselves, making dinner. The normalcy of the scene almost made me feel insane for what I was about to say, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. I asked them about Jack. They looked at me, confused. Who? They said, like they didn't even understand the question. I showed them the letters. I showed them the photos. My partner's face changed as they flipped through the papers. But instead of surprise, instead of the concern I expected, there was nothing. A flicker of recognition maybe, but nothing more. Why would you be asking about this? They said quietly, their voice strangely distant. I don't know, I said, my voice shaking. I don't remember writing these. I don't remember Jack. Who is he? They just stared at the photos, the silence stretching between us. I don't know, my partner finally whispered, their eyes darting away from mine. I didn't believe them. I couldn't. My heart was pounding. There was something wrong here, something huge I wasn't understanding. I could feel it deep in my bones. But the more I looked at their face, the more I realized they weren't lying. They weren't hiding anything. They just didn't know. I sat there for a while, staring at the photos, the letters, the lifeless eyes of the man who looked like me, but wasn't. What was going on? What was happening to me? It wasn't until later that night, after my partner had gone to bed, that I truly lost it. I couldn't stop thinking about the letters, about Jack, about the strange, hollow figure in the photos. I had to know the truth. I needed answers. I got up quietly and dug through my partner's things again. This time, I wasn't just looking for the letters. I was looking for something, anything, that might explain the strange connection between the photos, the letters, and the man who looked like me. I scoured the drawer, the closet, the entire room. And then I found something else. A small notebook, tucked behind the books on the shelf. I opened it, and what I found there made my stomach churn. It was more writing, but this time it wasn't in my handwriting. It was in Jack's. The words were nearly identical to the ones I'd written in the letters. The same expressions of love, the same promises of being together forever, the same longing. But now, there was a twist to it, a warning almost. I'll be back soon, my love. You just have to wait. Remember me. Remember us. We're meant to be. I nearly dropped the notebook. I couldn't process it, couldn't understand what I was reading. Jack's handwriting was identical to mine, but I had never seen it before. I couldn't remember writing any of it. I couldn't remember any of it. And then, like a slap to my face, the truth started to dawn on me. This was me. This person in the photos, this Jack, this was me. I had written the letters. I had sent them. But I didn't remember doing it. I didn't remember any of it. And yet, the eyes in the photo were still empty, hollow, lifeless, just like the words I was reading. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I wasn't sure if I had ever really known. The man in those letters, he wasn't just a stranger. He was me, but not the me I knew, the me I used to be. And now I was starting to forget even that. The truth wasn't just buried in the past. It was inside me, growing, waiting for me to remember. But with every memory I tried to hold on to, it slipped further away. And the worst part, I didn't know if I wanted to remember anymore. I'll never forget that night. It was supposed to be like any other. Just me and my partner, sitting in the living room, watching the movie, laughing, talking like we always did. But something was off. I could feel it in the air, a weight, a tension that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the fact that they'd been acting strangely for the past few weeks, distant, secretive, their phone always face down, never leaving their side. Maybe it was my gut telling me something was wrong, but I knew I had to confront them. I caught them red-handed. I found the messages, the calls, too many to ignore. And that night, I was done pretending. I had to face them, even if it meant ripping everything apart. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of their lies. I remember walking into the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even know what I was going to say at first. But the second I looked at them, sitting there on the couch like everything was normal, I just snapped. I told them I knew. I told them I knew about the other person. The late night texts, the secret meetups. Their face changed, but not in the way I expected. There wasn't guilt or shame. There wasn't any apology or regret. There was a smile. That wasn't right. They had never smiled like that before, not in a situation like this. It was too wide, too eerie. Their eyes didn't seem to be focused on me anymore. And then it happened. I don't know how to explain it. One minute, they were sitting there, their hands folded in their lap. The next, they jerked forward, like a puppet with its strings cut. Their bodies shuddered violently. I froze, my blood going cold as I watched them convulse in front of me. Their limbs twisted and contorted, unnatural, like their body was fighting against itself. I didn't know what to do, whether to run or to scream, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. And then something broke. With a sound that made my stomach churn, their skin seemed to tear down the middle, as though it couldn't hold them together anymore. It was like a zipper unzipping, a seam splitting wide open. The body I had loved for so long, my partner's body, came apart, and out of the hole in their chest, something else emerged. It was a perfect copy, exactly like them, every detail down to the smallest freckle. But the eyes were different, empty, cold. They didn't look like the person I spent years with. The original, my partner, was still there, slumped over, staring blankly ahead, not moving. But the copy, the thing that stepped out of their skin, stood tall, smooth, like nothing had happened at all. It looked at me with those hollow eyes, and then it kissed the original partner on the forehead. A gentle kiss, like an intimate goodbye. And then it turned toward me, its mouth curling into a smile. Finally, it said, its voice calm and soothing, "We can all be together." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The words didn't make sense, not in the way a normal conversation would. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or if I had somehow fallen into some twisted nightmare. But what I knew for sure, deep in my gut, was that this wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was something much worse. The copy of my partner took a step closer, its eyes locked onto mine. Its movements were fluid, unnatural, like it was part of a machine that never stopped. And as it walked toward me, I couldn't tear my eyes away from its face, the face that was so familiar, yet not at all. "You didn't know, did you?" it said, its voice now laced with a strange familiarity. It sounded like them, but it didn't feel like them. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my mind a whirlwind. "What do you mean? Who are you? What have you done to them?" The thing that used to be my partner didn't answer right away. Instead, it stepped closer, and for a brief moment, its smile faded into something almost apologetic. It's not what you think, it said. It's tone soothing. But now we can be together. All of us. The three of us. The room started to spin. My head was filled with questions, but none of them made any sense. My mind was struggling to process what was happening, what this thing, this monster, was saying to me. I don't understand, I whispered, shaking my head. What do you mean, three of us? It smiled again, the same wide, unnerving grin, and then nodded toward the original body, still slumped and unmoving. That's the old one, the copy said, as though the person sitting there wasn't even worth the effort of explaining. This is the one we've been waiting for. We just needed the right time to make it happen. It's always been like this, you see. You just didn't know. But now it's all coming together. I couldn't make sense of any of it. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was going to choke on the fear that had lodged itself deep inside my throat. The way it said, coming together, sent a chill through my bones. What the hell are you? I managed to get out, my voice trembling. The copy seemed pleased by my question, like it was waiting for this moment, this exact line of questioning. It tilted its head slightly, its lifeless eyes studying me. I'm them, and I'm not them. I'm the us, it said, its words sliding into my mind like a cold snake. We've always been together, the two of us, the one who was and the one who is. I didn't understand, but then something clicked. A horrible, sickening realization filled my chest, making it hard to breathe. The smile on the copy's face grew wider, more satisfied. It was saying that my partner had never been my partner. Not really. That they'd been sharing the same body, some twisted existence between them and this thing, this other half. We're the same, it said. I've always been here, waiting for the right moment. And suddenly, the words I'd heard, the messages, the secrecy, all of it came rushing back. It hadn't been a different person they were cheating with. It had been this thing inside of them. You'll understand eventually, the copy whispered, its voice now far too calm. It's always been like this. We are one, but also not. And now, finally, we can all be together. I backed away, my head spinning. My partner, the real one, the one I thought I knew, was still just sitting there, lifeless, in the chair. The one that had spoken to me, kissed their own forehead, and turned toward me with cold eyes was the thing that was really in control. And it had been for longer than I could even comprehend. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing down. It was like I wasn't even part of this anymore, like I didn't belong. The only thing I could do, the only thing I had to do, was get out. But the thing that used to be my partner wasn't done yet. It took another step toward me, and I felt a surge of terror flood my body. It wasn't just talking anymore, it was coming for me. I turned and ran. I didn't care what direction I was going, just that I had to get out. I could hear it behind me, moving smoothly, like it was always meant to follow. But as I reached the door, I glanced back. It wasn't just my partner. It wasn't just a stranger. It was something older, darker, and it had finally revealed itself. I noticed it about a week ago. At first, it was just a little strange. My partner, my boyfriend, standing in front of the mirror late at night, talking to someone. Or at least, that's what it looked like. His lips moved, but he never spoke loud enough for me to hear the words. He didn't seem to be talking to me, not in any real way. At first, I figured he was just having a rough day, venting to himself. Everyone has their moments, but then it started happening every night, and it started to bug me. He'd stand in front of the mirror, his back to me, for what felt like hours. He'd run his hands along the surface, as though he was trying to make contact with something. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling, but not in a way I recognized. It wasn't like a happy smile. It was more like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I tried to ask him about it a few times, but he'd always shrug it off. Just tired, babe. It's nothing, he'd say, but there was an odd shift in his eyes, something that told me he wasn't being entirely honest. The thing is, we've been together for a while now, long enough for me to know when something's up. And there was definitely something up with him, something off. I tried not to let it bother me. I'd roll over, bury my face in the pillow, and let him have his time. But I couldn't ignore it forever. The whispers, the soft muttering, the way he'd smile like he was having a secret conversation with someone that I couldn't see. It was starting to eat away at me. It was like there was a part of him slipping away, and I wasn't allowed to know about it. One night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, staring at the clock as the minutes ticked by. It was past 2 a.m., and I knew he'd be in front of the mirror again. I don't know why, but this time I felt an urge to watch him. I felt like I had to see what he was doing. So quietly, I slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway. I stood just outside the bedroom door, my breath held tight in my chest. There he was, exactly where I knew he would be, standing in front of the mirror, his back to me. His reflection was slightly distorted in the low light, but I could see his lips moving again, talking to someone. I still couldn't hear the words, but this time it felt different. There was something more urgent about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I waited. I couldn't take my eyes off him, and then I saw it. In the dim light of the room, I could have sworn I saw the faintest shadow move beside him in the mirror, just a flicker at first. Maybe I was imagining it, but when he smiled this time, it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was almost unnatural. His eyes were locked on something, and it wasn't the reflection of himself. It was as though he was looking directly at someone else, someone I couldn't see. I felt my stomach drop. Something about the whole scene felt so wrong. I knew I should have turned around, gone back to bed, let him have his weird moments, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then, just as quickly as it started, the whole thing stopped. He turned slowly and walked away from the mirror, still looking at it as if someone was following him. I wasn't sure if he even noticed me standing there in the doorway. He just walked past me like I wasn't even there, his footsteps heavy and slow. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stayed frozen in place, unsure of what to do. When I woke up the next morning, I tried to forget about it. Tried to convince myself it was nothing. He acted normal, like he always did. We had breakfast. We talked about our plans for the day, but something in the back of my mind wouldn't let it go. What was he doing in front of that mirror? Who was he talking to? I decided I needed to know. Later that night, when I heard him moving around in the bathroom again, I didn't wait. I couldn't wait. I grabbed my phone and slid it into the pocket of my hoodie, turned off the lights, and silently made my way down the hall again. This time, I wasn't going to just watch from the doorway. I was going to be closer. I had to see what he was seeing, hear what he was hearing. I crouched down beside the door, peering through the crack, waiting. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I couldn't stop now. I had to know what was going on. And then there it was again. His reflection in the mirror, only this time, there was no shadow beside him, no one else in the frame. It was just him. And yet I could feel something there, a presence. And then as he leaned in closer to the mirror, the light flickered, casting an eerie glow over the room. I saw his fingers brush the surface, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw a hand inside the mirror. The shape of a hand pressing back, like someone or something was on the other side. My blood ran cold. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't just talking to himself. He was talking to someone trapped inside the mirror. That's when I saw it. In the reflection, the image of my boyfriend changed. He looked the same at first, but his eyes were dark, hollow. Like he wasn't there anymore. It was like something else was wearing his skin. I couldn't move. I was too paralyzed by what I was seeing. And then he did something that made my heart skip a beat. He turned to the side, his eyes never leaving the mirror. His body jerked suddenly, almost violently, and he pressed his hands against the glass. I could hear him muttering something, but it was like he wasn't speaking in English anymore. It wasn't him anymore. It couldn't be. It was like a completely different presence had taken over his body. And the worst part, it looked like he was trapped in there, staring out at me. Suddenly, there was a thud. I jumped back, barely catching myself as I scrambled to my feet. When I looked again, my heart nearly stopped. My partner was gone, but his reflection, still frozen in the mirror, was staring directly at me. His face pressed against the glass now, as if he was begging to be let out. His eyes were wild, pleading. I rushed forward, slamming my hands against the door. "What's happening? What's going on?" I shouted, my voice frantic. But the reflection didn't answer. It just stared, and then it grinned. That's when I heard him. The real him, his voice coming from the bathroom like nothing was wrong. He was still in there, still breathing, still moving around. But the thing in the mirror? It wasn't him anymore. I couldn't even begin to understand what was happening. I reached out, trembling, and grabbed the door handle. I opened it slowly, terrified of what I might find on the other side. When I stepped into the bathroom, there was nothing but emptiness. No one in front of the mirror, no signs of anyone being in there at all. It was like the room had never been disturbed, except for the reflection. It was still there. And this time, the thing inside the mirror spoke. "You should have listened," it said. Its voice not my partner's, but something darker, something twisted. "You should have left well enough alone." And then it smiled, that same unnerving grin. And for the first time, I understood. I understood that the person I'd been living with, the person I thought I knew, had never been entirely there at all. The real him was already gone. It was a stupid mistake. A one-night thing. A dumb slip-up I should have known better than to make. But when I woke up that morning, I had no idea that my life was about to shatter into something unrecognizable. I remember getting out of bed, stretching, and heading straight to the bathroom. I wasn't even fully awake yet, just running on autopilot, brushing my teeth, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. It wasn't until I turned to look at myself in the mirror that I noticed it. I froze. The reflection that had always been there, my face, my eyes, the outline of my body, was gone. The mirror was empty. It was like I wasn't even standing there. I raised a hand to my face, feeling the smooth surface of my skin, the familiar feeling of my body, but my reflection. It wasn't there. It wasn't just blurry. It wasn't a distortion. It was like I was invisible. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and tried again. Nothing. I stepped closer to the mirror, my heart racing in my chest. I was still there, of course, but the glass just showed an empty space where I should have been. I could barely breathe. My hands started to shake. The reality hit me like a punch to the gut. What the hell was happening? I couldn't even see my own face. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was still too tired. Maybe the mirror was dirty, cracked, something that made it weird. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. This wasn't a normal way to start the day. I ran out of the bathroom, my heart beating out of my chest. My partner was still in bed, fast asleep. I was desperate to get some kind of normalcy back, to hear a voice that made sense, something that would tell me this was all just some bizarre fluke. But when I tried to wake them up, they didn't react. It was like I wasn't even there. I shook them. "Hey, wake up, what's wrong with you?" I said, but there was nothing, not even a stir. It was like they were frozen in time. Confused and panicking, I grabbed my phone and called a few friends, desperate for someone to answer, but every call went straight to voicemail. Then I tried texting them. Nothing. No reply. I figured maybe it was a problem with the network or something, but when I got to work, that's when things really started to spiral. I walked into the office, and nobody even looked up. My coworkers passed by me without a second glance. They didn't wave. They didn't even acknowledge that I was there. It was as though I was just another shadow in the room. I stopped in front of a few desks, trying to get someone's attention, but they just walked right through me. The receptionist didn't even smile, didn't even flinch. It was like I wasn't even real. By the time I reached my boss's office, I was breathing heavily. My palms were slick with sweat. I knocked on the door, trying to get their attention. "Hey, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice shaking. But when they looked up, their eyes didn't register anything. They just stared through me, like I was some invisible force. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my throat tight with panic. "Yeah, you're fine." "Everything's fine," they replied. "Can I help you with something?" I stepped back, not knowing what to say. "No, I just wanted to talk about the project, the deadline." I couldn't even finish my sentence. They weren't even looking at me. They didn't care. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just invisible. They weren't seeing me. I left the office early, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. As soon as I got home, I immediately tried to reach my partner again. I sent texts. I called. But everything went unanswered. It was like they didn't even care. They didn't even know who I was anymore. By the time evening rolled around, I was losing it. I went to their work, hoping for some kind of recognition, any sign that they hadn't completely forgotten me. But when I got there, They didn't look at me the way they usually did. They didn't smile, didn't wave. They didn't even blink when I walked right past them. It was like I was a ghost. I went to the bar, hoping to find someone who would recognize me, someone who'd see me for who I really was. But no one did. I walked up to the bartender, a guy I'd known for years, and ordered a drink. He didn't even greet me the way he normally did. He just turned away, like he didn't even know I existed. By the time I went home that night, I was on the verge of losing it. I didn't know who to turn to, or if anyone would even recognize me if I tried. But as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror again, staring at the empty reflection, I felt something cold crawl through my chest. I could see the outline of my body, my face. But it wasn't me. It couldn't be. It was like I was being erased bit by bit. And it wasn't stopping. Days passed and things only got worse. The more I tried to reach out, the more people seemed to forget me. My family, my friends, even my coworkers, who'd once known me so well, acted like I was a complete stranger. And I couldn't stop it. The more I fought against it, the more it took over. The worst part? My partner. At first, they just looked at me with confusion, like I was some person they didn't recognize. But it didn't take long before their eyes grew colder, more distant. They stopped acknowledging me. They stopped replying to my calls. They even stopped talking to me like I didn't matter. One night, I came home after a long day of being ignored by everyone. I was exhausted, broken. I tried to find my partner, but they weren't in the house. I went to the bedroom, but they weren't there either. Then I heard it, the sound of them in the living room, talking softly. I rushed down the hall, and when I saw them, they were sitting there, staring out the window like they didn't even know I was standing right behind them. I tried to say their name, but they didn't react. They didn't even blink. I was practically baiting them to see me, to recognize me, but it was like I was invisible. It was like I never existed in the first place. That's when I realized the truth. It wasn't just my reflection that was disappearing. It was everything, my entire life. I was being erased, slowly, bit by bit. People were forgetting me. And no matter how hard I tried to hold on, no matter how loud I screamed, nothing would bring me back. I was fading away, becoming a memory, a forgotten ghost in the lives of everyone I'd ever known. My partner, the love of my life, didn't even see me anymore, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I completely vanished. Before everyone forgot who I was, before I was nothing more than a shadow of a person that never existed at all, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It started slow. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but after a while, it was impossible to ignore. It was just a quick thing, you know? A one-night affair that meant nothing. That's what I told myself anyway. I had been feeling distant from my partner for months, maybe longer, and when I met them, it was like a breath of fresh air. I thought it was harmless. I didn't mean for it to spiral out of control, but that's the thing with cheating, isn't it? Once you cross that line, you can't uncross it. The guilt started creeping in the next morning, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I started seeing her. It was nothing obvious at first. I would be sitting at home, staring out the window, and for a moment, I'd swear I saw her face in the reflection of the Rain Street glass. It would only last a second, just a glimpse, but I'd feel it, like a chill down my spine, and the feeling would stick with me for hours. I brushed it off. Maybe I was still thinking about what happened. I mean, it had been a huge mistake, right? I told myself it was nothing to worry about. But then it started happening more frequently. I was cleaning the house one day, running my hand across the old wallpaper in the hallway when I froze. There, in the patterns, was the outline of her face. I thought I was losing my mind, and honestly, maybe I was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. Her smile was always there, faint but present, like it was embedded into the very fabric of the house. I couldn't tell anyone. If I told my partner, it would be over. I'd lose everything. So I kept quiet and tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. I'd be out in public, walking through the grocery store, and I'd catch glimpses of her in the faces of strangers. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or a random resemblance, but then it happened again and again. I'd look at someone, and their face would morph into hers for a split second, just enough for me to feel the familiar panic rise in my chest. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things. But the truth was, it was getting harder and harder to ignore. I could see her everywhere, in the reflection of a store window, in the shadows of street corners, in the crowd of faces that blurred together as I walked down the sidewalk. No matter where I went, no matter how far I drove or how many times I turned my head, she was always there, watching, waiting, smiling. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding in my chest. My room was dark, but I felt it, that presence. I knew she was there. I could hear her breathing, soft and steady, just a few inches from my ear. I sat up, heart hammering. The room was empty, but when I looked back at the bed, there she was. Her face, right there in the shadows. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I stared at the outline of her figure, her smile widening, stretching unnaturally across her face. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, she was gone, vanished. But the feeling lingered, that overwhelming sense that she was always there, lurking just out of sight, watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge her. I tried to tell myself that I was going crazy, that it was all in my head. But no matter how hard I tried to push it out of my mind, I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her smile. It was haunting me, and I couldn't escape it. I started to get paranoid. Everywhere I went, I would search the crowd, look over my shoulder, hoping she wasn't there, hoping she hadn't found me again. But there were times when I'd feel her presence, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and I'd turn around to find no one. It was like she was playing a game with me, toying with my mind, just waiting for me to break. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror without feeling her eyes on me. It was like she was inside my head, manipulating everything I saw, every person I encountered. I tried to tell my partner about it. I thought maybe I could explain, but the words got stuck in my throat. How do you explain that your lover is stalking you, even though you were the one who cheated? I couldn't risk losing everything. I couldn't lose them. But one night, when I was sitting in the living room, I saw her again. I looked out the window, and there she was, standing in the rain, her face pressed against the glass. She was smiling, that same twisted, knowing smile. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, rushing toward the door, desperate to get away, desperate to escape. I threw open the door, but she wasn't there. The street was empty, but I could feel her. She was always watching, just out of reach, just beyond my grasp. And then, like a whisper in my ear, I heard it, the softest of laughs. It wasn't just in my head. It was real. She was real. And she wasn't going anywhere. The smile stayed with me. Everywhere I went, I could feel it. I could feel her eyes on me, always there, always waiting. And every time I tried to get away, to forget the affair, to pretend like everything was normal, the smile would follow me. It was in the patterns on the walls. It was in the faces of strangers. It was in the reflections, in the corners of every room, in the dark. She was always there, always watching, and always smiling. And no matter what I did, I knew she wouldn't let me go. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, haunted by the person I had betrayed, knowing that she would never, ever leave me. The curse of my infidelity wasn't just guilt. It was her smile, always there, always watching, waiting for me to break.